Hello, Rakesh. It's great to have you here. Um, like we know already that you're working for TUV, which is, empowering the private sector to be more ethical in terms of production, so that in the end line, consumers can be more ethical in terms of consumption. So, could you tell us more about what you do and what TUV does as a company?
Sure. Thanks a lot. I'm with TUV Rheinland, TUV. The philosophy of the company is to assess for safety. So the logo of our company as a triangle that you see, where one of the vertices represents human being, the second vertex represents technology, and the third one represents environment. So the whole concept and the philosophy of the company is whenever there's an interaction between human and technology, let's say a worker working with machinery or a consumer holding an electronic product or wearing a textile product, or when technology is interacting with environment to assess for safety, to assess for compliance of that activity. As a non-profit organization, our philosophy revolves around assessing and ensuring that progress is validated on those fronts. Um, then, as we heard about environment, so there was already a link to our activity. We took it a step further by signing up for UN Global Compact,
Wow.
which allows companies to come together via action platforms and move things further. A lot of the work that we do is validating for correctness, whether it is for safety or quality or environment. To give you an example, when we buy a pair of blue jeans, when we are washing it for the first time, it would not be a pleasant experience for the consumer if the color is coming off.
Yeah.
It's about quality. It would not be a good experience if the consumer is then having an itching sensation on the skin because of some harmful chemical. And it would not be good for the environment if the consumer is then throwing that jeans in the landfill, in the garbage bin, and it is going and connecting to the soil and the chemicals go out. So a lot of the work that we do is verifying that those negative impacts are being measured and progress on improving them is being measured. So that's on a high level, yeah.
Okay, I would like to ask you that you talked about, how your company tries to measure the impact that the production company are having. For example, like a pair of jeans, if they dump it in the garbage or in the landfill, then that has an impact in the environment. But I would also like to know that, how do you handle the negative environmental impact that we have from the fashion industry? Because I'm personally working in the fashion industry, and I know that fashion industry is the second, most polluted industry in the world. So, it is a necessity these days to, empower the value chain, the actors in the value chain, and also to make sure that fashion is green and ethical these days. So, what is your take on that? I mean, what is your opinion on that?
Right. So first of all, on an organizational basis, our activity there is as an independent verifier of the status quo, of the situation. We do not influence the industry in regards to the direction it goes to, but what we can check and verify for is, for example, the working conditions in the supply chain. When we purchase a T-shirt for a couple of dollars and jeans for less than 10, um, which is going through a complex supply chain, you are pretty much sure that somebody in there is not being treated fairly. It can be a human being, it can be an environment, or both. Um, what we have seen is that information and awareness about the impact that the fashion industry has, the negative impact, is coming out more openly. So there are brands and retailers talking about it. There are international, intergovernmental agencies like ILO and so on active there. There are companies or organizations like UNECE, which is trying to reduce the fatigue from the multitude of standards and remove the trade barriers to somehow have a harmonization, but then also to offer a platform to scale up those standards which are developed. Essentially, when we look at measurement these days and validating what's going on, we look at social aspects, environmental aspects, consumer safety aspects. But in the broader perspective, what we see is that we hear always of a win-win approach. We hear about collaboration. In terms of the fashion industry winning, we feel that it has to be a win, 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 win approach. The consumer has to win, the brand or retailer has to win, the supplier has to win, the economy of the country where it is being produced has to win, and finally the environment also has to win. Yeah, if you were to ask any of the people here with a show of hands, anybody here who is not happy with what you are wearing? One. One out of maybe 1,000, yeah? That's the positive impact of the industry. It brings joy to the people. It brings out this kind of comfort for the people. It has a huge impact on that regards, and now it has started its activity to reduce the negative impact, or rather to have more positive impact, to give a little bit more into the communities, into the supply chain, to make lives better for the workers and also make things better for the environment.
I would also like to know, as a young leader, as we are working for SDGs, we're being the voice for SDGs to the youth of the next generation, to inspire them to work in the development sector, to empower the ideas of sustainable development goals. So, as TUV, as an organization, how do you approach the sustainable development goals in your regular practice, job practice?
Thanks. That's something that has been actively being reviewed in the past couple of years. So essentially, it links back to our philosophy. First of all, being a non-profit, the idea was to contribute to the interaction of the three elements: human being, technology, and environment. We took it a step further by signing up for UN Global Compact to implement those principles in our operations, and then seeing how our activities, our assurance services can make an impact. For example, what happens when we validate the social practices in the supply chain? How does that impact the goal for decent work in the supply chain? When we validate the water stewardship initiatives in the industry, how does that impact the access to clean water? When we validate the way products are being manufactured with less use of virgin material, with less use of hazardous chemicals, with eliminating hazardous chemicals being discharged into wastewater, how that contributes to sustainable production. On the other hand, we also have an awareness that information such as this is not available to a common person in the world, with the majority of consumers living on just minimum wages to survive. So this is where we have educational programs, awareness programs, telling and informing public about safety, but also informing them about how there are environmental metrics associated to every product that they purchase, and how via their decisions they could contribute towards the SDGs.
This is absolutely what inspired me, because I am also working in the ethical fashion where, I belong to a country which is the second largest producer of ready-made garments as Bangladesh. And we have a lot of, issues regarding this, way the employees and the labor are being treated in my country. So I would also like to know that in my country particularly, I have seen a lot of cases of subcontracting. And when this sort of subcontracting happens, the large-scale fast fashion brands, they don't want to acknowledge the fact that this is happening. That's number one. And number two, because they are not acknowledging the fact, it remains hidden, but it's still there. So the sufferer are basically the sweatshop workers or those who are working under $2, but working for maybe 16 hours a day. So, in the long run, they remain within the informal economy, they suffer, go through the social exclusion phase, and it just continues for generations after generations. So, since you are approaching to the Sustainable Development Goals in your practice, I believe you're approaching to Sustainable Development Goal 8, the inclusion and everything. So, given all of this, what is your company or your thought on the idea of subcontracting, the challenges that we're facing these days on the issue of subcontracting, and what do you think should be the measures that should be taken to stop this practice of modern day slavery in different countries?
So, to the topic of subcontracting and the fashion industry, the manufacturing space, we always hear about the term of supply chain, fashion supply chain, which is a complete incorrect terminology because it's not a chain, it's a web, like you said. It's a web, it's a mesh of several subcontractors hidden there. A lot of this is based on the business practices. When we hear from factories, we get a message of some kind of neo-colonism where the brands and retailers and buyers are saying, let's do that, let's do that, let's do that, but at reduced price and further reduction, which then leads them to follow practices which are not ethical on the factory level. Um, eh, from our side, again, as an organization, what we are validating is if there is subcontracting based on hard data, so looking at the warehouse, looking at the capacity, production capacity, looking at the order volume, and then trying to have a mass balance ratio if it actually can work out or if there is a hidden subcontraction. But what's also interesting and what's also useful is the ideas of traceability, for example, which UNECE and other organizations have been promoting to have more visibility, to make it easier, better for the brand, retailer, and the consumer, and putting it ironically, to address the challenges, the fashion industry could get naked, could showcase the complete process and make it visible what challenges exist. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a wonderful, incredible thought. I would really, acknowledge the fact that it's a great deal. It's a great thing that you're doing. That you're, verifying companies. You're validating them. You're bringing in transparency to the all the levels of stakeholders in the value chain. That's a great thing to do. It's an honor to talk to you here. It's great having you here. I would really appreciate if all the private sector players get involved in your company, get verified through all the value checks you guys, your company has to offer. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.